He stole a kiss just to silence her. Now, he's desperate for more. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be silenced? Not with words, but with a kiss. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind howling around you, screaming, into the chaos of a storm. And then, out of nowhere, strong hands pull you back from the brink, and before you can even process what's happening, his lips crash against yours. It's not romantic in the fairy tale sense. It's raw, unexpected, and leaves your heart racing for reasons you can't quite explain. That's exactly where our story begins, right here in Santorini, under a sky that seems as restless as the secrets buried beneath its cliffs. This is the tale of Eleni Kostas, a girl who talks too much, and Nikos Stavros, a man who says too little. Their worlds collide one stormy night, setting off a chain reaction neither of them could have predicted. Eleni is the kind of person who fills silence with her voice, her laughter, her questions, her endless curiosity about life. She grew up running barefoot through the cobbled streets of Fira, selling shell bracelets to tourists, and chatting with anyone who would listen. Her mother always joked that Eleni's tongue was both her greatest gift and her biggest curse. But on this particular night, her voice wasn't enough, as she stood on the cliffs, shouting at the raging sea below, challenging the storm, like it owed her something. Fate intervened. Nico appeared out of nowhere, grabbing her just moments before she might have fallen. And then came the kiss, a jolt of electricity that stopped time itself. For an instant, everything else faded away. The rain, the wind, the crashing waves. All that remained was him, his hands holding her face, his breath mixing with hers. When he finally let go, all Eleni could do was stare at him, her mind spinning with more questions than answers. Who was this stranger who kissed her? Like it was the last thing he'd ever do. Nikos Stavros isn't someone you forget easily. With his dark grey eyes, black hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, and a presence that feels both magnetic and dangerous. He's the kind of man people whisper about. 2 years ago, he arrived in Santorini with money no one understood and silence no one could penetrate. He bought half the cliffs just to isolate himself, living in a house perched high above a moody bay. Some say he's a writer fleeing fame. Others claim he's hiding from something or someone. Whatever the truth, Nico keeps to himself, avoiding the townsfolk and their prying eyes. Until now, because when he pulled Eleni back from the edge that night, he didn't just save her. He set something in motion that neither of them can escape. What makes their encounter so compelling isn't just the kiss itself, but what follows. The next morning, as the sun rose over Santorini, painting the white houses with golden light, Eleni couldn't shake the memory of Nico's touch, or the way his gaze lingered on her, like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. At the market in Fira, amidst the colourful stalls and bustling vendors, their paths crossed again. This time, there was no storm, no danger, just the quiet intensity of his stare, and the orange he twirled between his fingers like a nervous habit. "Do you always carry that notebook?" he asked, his voice low and almost hesitant. Eleni retorted with her usual wit, but inside, her pulse quickened. There was something about him, an air of mystery, yes, but also a sadness that tugged at her heart. When they shared the orange later, sitting near the blue-domed church, the moment felt intimate in a way neither of them expected. For Eleni, it wasn't just about the taste of citrus on her tongue. It was the way Nico looked at her, like she reminded him of someone he lost long ago. But as days turned into weeks, Eleni began to realize that Nico wasn't just a brooding outsider with a penchant for solitude. He was carrying a burden heavy enough to crush him, and somehow, without meaning to, She had become part of it. One grey morning, while helping her aunt pick figs in an orchard near Imerovigli, Eleni overheard a conversation that changed everything. Hidden behind a bush, she watched as Nico argued with a grey-haired man whose sharp tone cut through the rustling leaves. "You can't stay here forever," the man said. "She needs to know what's at stake." Eleni's blood ran cold. They were talking about her. She didn't understand why, but it was clear that Nico had been trying to protect her from something or someone, and now those shadows from his past were closing in. The tension reaches its peak on another stormy night when Nico shows up at Eleni's doorstep, soaked and frantic. "They're coming," he tells her, his voice urgent, "and they think you're important. To me, important to him." Eleni barely knows Nico, yet every word he speaks feels like a thread pulling her deeper into his world. Together, they flee through the narrow alleys of Fira, the sound of screeching tires echoing behind them. The pursuers are relentless, their headlights slicing through the darkness like blades. Nico leads Eleni to a hidden cove, where the waves crash violently against the rocks. In the chaos, he reveals the truth about his sister, Kalia, whose death haunts him still. "You remind me of her," he confesses, his voice breaking. "I saw her in you that night on the cliffs, and I couldn't let you fall." But the relief of understanding is short-lived. The headlights appear above them, voices shouting in the rain. Nico pulls Eleni behind a rock, his body shielding hers. "I won't let them hurt you," he whispers, his promise fierce and unyielding. Yet even as they plan their escape, Eleni can't help but wonder, will facing these demons bring them closer, or tear them apart as the boat cuts through the waves, carrying them farther from shore? Eleni realizes this isn't just about running anymore. Nico has made a decision to stop hiding, to confront the guilt and pain he's carried for years. But will it be enough? Can love truly conquer the weight of the past? Or will the secrets they've uncovered drag them under? The sun begins to rise, casting a soft glow over the horizon. But the questions remain unanswered. Who are these pursuers? And what do they want from Nico? How far will he go to protect Eleni? And how much is she willing to risk for him? As they step onto an isolated beach, hand in hand, the future stretches before them like the endless sea. But one thing is certain, nothing will ever be the same again. To find out what happens next, stay tuned for the next chapter of this unforgettable journey. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. See you soon. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the cliffs of Santorini, Eleni and Nico walked back toward the village. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Each step they took together, feeling like a fragile thread, holding them to this new reality. For Eleni, it wasn't just about understanding who Nico was or what he had done. It was about figuring out who she was in all of this. She'd always been the girl who talked too much, filling silence with her voice. But now she found herself wondering if there was power in listening, in letting someone else speak without interruption. And for Nico, every moment spent with Eleni felt like walking on thin ice. Beautiful, yet dangerous. He knew that sooner or later the past would catch up to him. And when it did, he didn't want her anywhere near it. But how could he push her away when she made him feel alive again? The deeper they went into their journey, the more layers of Nico's story began to unravel. That night, as they sat by the fire at an abandoned tavern on the outskirts of Fira, Nico finally opened up about Kalia. His sister hadn't just been his sibling. She'd been his anchor, his confidant, his reason to keep going. When she died in that boat accident years ago, Nico lost more than just her. He lost himself. I should have been paying attention, he said, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. She trusted me, and I let her down. Eleni listened quietly, her heart aching for the pain he carried. It wasn't hard to see why he ran. To escape the accusing eyes, the whispers behind closed doors, the blame that followed him wherever he went. But what struck her most was how much he reminded her of herself, someone desperate to outrun their demons, only to find that those demons were faster than they thought. Meanwhile, the grey-haired man and his associates weren't giving up. They lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting. Their leader, a man named Dimitri, had once been close to Nico's family before tragedy tore them apart. To him, Nico wasn't just responsible for Kalia's death. He was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Revenge wasn't just personal for Dimitri. It was justice. And now, with Eleni in the picture, things had escalated. She's his weakness, Dimitri told his men one evening, pacing back and forth in a dimly lit room overlooking the sea. If we take her, we break him. His words sent shivers down the spines of even his most hardened followers. This wasn't just about retribution anymore. It was about control, about making sure Nico paid not just with his life, but with his soul. Back in the village, Eleni tried to piece together the fragments of Nico's story while grappling with her own emotions. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but this was different. These weren't petty arguments or misunderstandings. They were lives intertwined by grief, betrayal, and secrets buried so deep they might never fully surface. One afternoon, while helping Sophia sort through old books in her grandmother's attic, Eleni stumbled upon a photograph tucked between the pages of a dusty novel. In it, a younger Nico stood beside a smiling girl who bore an uncanny resemblance to her. That's Kalia, Sophia said softly, noticing the shock on Eleni's face. Your energy. It's eerie, isn't it? Eleni nodded, her mind racing. Was it possible that she truly was like Kalia? Or was it something else entirely? Something deeper, something neither of them could explain. As days turned into weeks, tension built like a storm, brewing on the horizon. Nico and Eleni grew closer, their bond strengthening despite the looming threat. Yet, cracks began to show. Nico's nightmares became more frequent, waking him in cold sweats as memories of Kalia haunted him. Eleni, too, struggled with doubts. Could she really help him confront his past? Or would she end up being collateral damage in his war against himself? The turning point came during a festival in Oya, where the entire island gathered to celebrate the harvest moon. Amidst the laughter, music, and dancing, Eleni spotted Dimitri across the square, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. Panic surged through her veins, but instead of running, she grabbed Nico's hand and pulled him into the crowd. We can't keep hiding, she whispered urgently. They're here. Nico's jaw tightened, his protective instincts kicking in. Stay close, he murmured, scanning the area for any sign of danger. But it was already too late. Dimitri's men moved quickly, blending into the festivities until they surrounded them. A scuffle broke out, sending chaos rippling through the crowd. Eleni fought back with everything she had, her fists flying, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. But it wasn't enough. Just as one of the men reached for her, Nico stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. Leave her out of this, he shouted, his voice raw with fury. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The clash of wills, the weight of unresolved anger, the fear etched into both sides. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the confrontation ended, leaving behind only echoes of footsteps fading into the night. But the reprieve was short-lived. Back at Nico's cliffside home, the two of them sat in tense silence, the events of the evening replaying in their minds. "You can't protect me forever," Eleni said finally, breaking the quiet. Her words hung heavy in the air, a truth neither of them wanted to face. Nico looked at her, his grey eyes reflecting the flickering flames of the fireplace. "Maybe not," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll die trying." It was then that Eleni realized something crucial. This wasn't just about saving her or facing his guilt. It was about redemption. Nico needed to prove to himself that he wasn't the man everyone believed him to be, that he was capable of love, of forgiveness, of starting over. And Eleni, she needed to prove that she could stand beside him, no matter what. The climax approached swiftly, each day bringing them closer to the inevitable showdown. One morning, as they prepared to leave for Amudi Bay, a note arrived, slipped under the door. Written in bold, angry strokes, it read, "Meet us at the lighthouse tonight, or she pays the price." Nico crumpled the paper in his fist, rage simmering beneath the surface. "No," Eleni said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "This ends tonight, together." The determination in her voice left no room for argument. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the cliffs in hues of orange and purple, they set out for the lighthouse, their hearts pounding in sync. The wind carried the scent of salt and an impending rain, and the waves crashed against the rocks below with a ferocity that mirrored the storm brewing within them. When they arrived, Dimitri and his men were already there, silhouetted against the backdrop of the raging sea. The tension was palpable, the air charged with hostility. "You've caused enough trouble, Nico," Dimitri spat, stepping forward. "It's time to settle this." Nico squared his shoulders, his grip tightening around Eleni's hand. "I won't let you hurt her," he growled, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Dimitri smirked, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about her. It's about you. You think you can run forever. You think you deserve peace after what you did." The accusation hit its mark, and for a moment, Nico faltered. But then Eleni stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "He's not the same man you remember," she declared, standing tall, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And neither am I, whatever happens. Next, we face it together." With those words, the final act began. A battle not just of strength, but of courage, forgiveness, and the unyielding power of human connection. Would Nico find the redemption he sought? Could Eleni truly stand by his side through the darkest moments? And what sacrifices would they have to make to rewrite their destinies? The sun was climbing higher, painting the cliffs of Santorini in hues of gold and pink. But the peace we felt on that isolated beach was fleeting. As much as Nico wanted to believe the danger had passed, I knew those shadows from his past weren't done chasing him, or us. The moment we stepped back into Fira, the village buzzed with an unusual tension. People whispered behind their hands, glancing at Nico, as if they sensed something was coming. It wasn't long before reality caught up with us. Dimitri and his men found us near the old windmill overlooking the sea. They didn't come quietly this time. Their cars screeched to a halt, blocking our path, and the sound of boots hitting cobblestones echoed through the narrow streets. Nico pushed me behind him instinctively, his body rigid with anger and fear. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low but steady. Dimitri stepped forward, his grey hair catching the sunlight, his eyes cold and calculating. "You can't run forever, Nico," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "She's not safe with you." I couldn't stay silent anymore. Stepping out from behind Nico, I faced Dimitri head on, my heart pounding, but my voice firm. If you have something to say about me, say it to my face. Dmitri raised an eyebrow, surprised by my defiance. But then he smiled. A cruel, bitter smile. You think you're helping him? You're just another piece in his mess, girl. When this ends, and it will, you'll wish you'd never met him. His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. I glanced at Nico. His jaw clenched, guilt etched across his face. He looked like a man ready to surrender, but I wasn't about to let that happen. You don't get to decide what happens next, I shot back, surprising even myself with how fierce I sounded. Nico isn't the man you remember. He's trying to fix things, to face what happened. But you're stuck in the past, punishing everyone around you because you can't forgive yourself. Dmitri flinched, his mask slipping for just a second. I could see it, the pain beneath the rage, the years of regret eating away at him. Whatever Kalia had meant to him, losing her had destroyed him too. For a moment, no one moved. The wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine, and the waves crashed against the rocks below, filling the silence. Then Dmitri spoke, his voice softer, now almost broken. Kalia was my niece, my brother's daughter, and yes, I've spent every day since her death blaming Nico for what happened. But maybe you're right. Maybe holding on to this hatred hasn't brought her back. Maybe it's only made me lose more. His admission hung in the air, heavy and raw. One by one, his men began to lower their weapons, their faces reflecting a mix of exhaustion and relief. Nico took a step forward, his shoulders slumping under the weight of everything unsaid. I'm sorry, Dmitri, he said, his voice trembling. I failed Kalia. I failed all of you. But running hasn't fixed anything. Hiding hasn't fixed anything. If there's any way to make amends, to honor her memory, I want to do that, with or without your forgiveness. Dmitri stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he nodded. Start by living Nico. That's what she would have wanted. The confrontation ended as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a strange kind of quiet. Dmitri and his men left, disappearing down the winding streets of Fira. For the first time in years, Nico seemed lighter, as if a burden he'd been carrying had finally lifted. We walked back to the cliffs together, the sea stretching endlessly before us. You were incredible back there, Nico said, his hand brushing mine. I don't know what I would have done without you. I smiled, though my chest still ached with everything we'd been through. You saved me first, remember? On that cliff, during the storm. Now it's my turn to help you figure out who you are when you're not running. Over the following weeks, life in Santorini began to feel different. Not perfect, but hopeful. Nico started opening up to the villagers, sharing pieces of himself instead of hiding away. He even helped rebuild the old tavern where Katerina worked, turning it into a place where people gathered to laugh and share stories. I introduced him to Sophia, who became his unofficial guide to navigating small-town gossip. Slowly but surely, Nico stopped being the mysterious outsider and started becoming part of the community. And me? I learned when to listen instead of always talking. Not all the time, of course. I was still me, but I found strength in moments of silence, especially when standing beside Nico. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, Nico and I stood on the same cliff where it all began. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of the sea and the promise of new beginnings. Do you remember that night? I asked, looking out at the waves crashing below. Nico chuckled, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. How could I forget? You were shouting at the wind like it owed you something. I playfully elbowed him, laughing despite myself. And you kissed me to shut me up. Not just to shut you up, he corrected, his voice softening. To keep you from falling, to hold on to something real when everything else felt like it was slipping away. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace. Well, mission accomplished. You saved me that night, and every day since. He kissed the top of my head, his lips lingering for a moment. No, Eleni, we saved each other. As we stood there, watching the stars emerge one by one, I realized something important. Life, like the sea, has its storms and calms. Sometimes it swallows you whole, and other times it gives you exactly what you need to keep going. Nico and I had weathered the worst of it together, and now, standing on the edge of something beautiful, I knew we were ready for whatever came next, because in the end, it wasn't just about surviving the chaos. It was about finding the courage to build something meaningful in its wake. And that, I thought, was worth every shout into the wind.